Edward Keene wiped concrete dust from his hands and checked his phone. 3 missed calls from a number he hadn't seen in 4 years. The area code told him everything he needed to know. Nancy Evans was back in his life. He considered letting it ring when the 4th call came through. Edward. Her voice carried that familiar fake sweetness that made his jaw clench. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. What do you want, Nancy? He walked away from his crew, who were pouring foundation for a new deck. The October air in Eugene carried the scent of wet leaves and approaching rain. Well, that's not very friendly. I'm actually in town on business. Got this amazing contracting opportunity, short-term, but excellent pay. The thing is, I need someone to watch Kaylee for just a month. Maybe 6 weeks at most. Edward stopped walking. Kaylee, my daughter, your niece. She's 11 now. Can you believe it? Time flies so fast. He remembered a scared 4-year-old hiding behind her mother's legs at his brother's funeral. That was 7 years ago, the last time he'd seen either of them. Why me? He kept his voice flat. Because you're family, and because you're the only person I trust with her. Trust. From Nancy Evans, the woman who'd borrowed $3,000 from his dying brother and never paid it back. The woman who'd cleaned out Tom's bank account while he was in hospice care. Where's she been staying while you've been working this job? A pause. With a friend. But that arrangement fell through. Edward heard machinery in the background, his own crew getting back to work. He had responsibilities. A business to run. The last thing he needed was to get tangled up with Nancy again. But Kaylee was Tom's daughter. His brother's child. 1 month, he said. Oh, Edward, thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to me. I can drop her off tonight if that works. Tonight. The job starts tomorrow morning. I know it's short notice, but fine. He hung up before she could say anything else. At T6:30 that evening, a dented Honda Civic pulled into his driveway. Edward watched from his kitchen window as Nancy got out, smoothed her hair, and opened the passenger door. A thin girl emerged, clutching a small backpack. Edward opened his front door as they approached. Nancy looked older than her 40 years, with bleached hair and tired eyes behind too much makeup. But it was Kaylee who made him pause. She was small for 11, all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. Her clothes hung loose on her frame. Uncle Edward, Nancy prompted when the girl stayed silent. Hi, Kaylee whispered, not meeting his eyes. Come on in. He stepped aside. Nancy bustled past him into the living room, talking fast. She's such a good girl, Edward. No trouble at all. She's quiet, keeps to herself. Won't give you any problems. Edward watched Kaylee hover near the door, still clutching her backpack. You hungry, kid? She shook her head quickly. I fed her before we came, Nancy said. She eats like a bird anyway. Never been much of an appetite. Edward studied his niece. Her wrists looked fragile enough to snap. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. I should get going, Nancy continued. Early morning tomorrow. Kaylee has my number if there's an emergency, but I'll probably be pretty busy with this project. What kind of project? Edward asked. Construction consulting. Very technical stuff. I'll call when I can. She bent down to Kaylee. Be good for Uncle Edward, okay? I'll be back before you know it. Kaylee nodded without speaking. Nancy straightened and headed for the door. Thank you again, Edward. This really means everything. She was gone before he could ask any more questions, leaving him alone with a niece he didn't know. Kaylee remained by the door, backpack in hand. You can put that down, Edward said. Let me show you where you'll sleep. He led her down the hall to his spare room. It was basic, a twin bed, a dresser, a small desk. Clean, but not much personality. Bathrooms across the hall. You need anything, just ask. She nodded and set her backpack on the bed. It looked like it contained everything she owned. You sure you're not hungry? How about sandwich stuff? Cereal? Whatever you want. I'm okay. Her voice was barely audible. Edward left her to unpack and went back to the kitchen. Through the window, he could see the Honda's taillights disappearing down the street. Something twisted in his stomach, a feeling he couldn't quite name. An hour later, he knocked on the spare room door. Kaylee? You doing all right? Yes, sir. He found her sitting on the bed, backpack still packed beside her. She hadn't moved. You don't have to call me sir. Edward's fine. Or Uncle Edward if you want. She nodded, but didn't speak. Tomorrow's Saturday. No school. We can figure out breakfast in the morning, Maybe drive around town. Show you where things are. Okay. He waited for more, but she just sat there, small and still. Well, get some rest. At 2 in the morning, Edward woke to the sound of running water. He found Kaylee in the bathroom, washing her hands for the third time since he'd started watching. Everything okay? She spun around, eyes wide with fear. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you up. You didn't wake me. Just wanted to make sure you were all right. She turned off the water with shaking hands. I couldn't sleep. Bad dreams. She shook her head too quickly. No, just couldn't sleep. Edward leaned against the doorframe. She looked even smaller in his oversized hallway, dwarfed by shadows. Why can't sleep? I make hot chocolate. You interested? For the first time, she looked directly at him. Okay. They sat at his kitchen table with steaming mugs. Kaylee wrapped her hands around hers, but didn't drink. Your mom said you're 11 now. Yes, sir. Edward. What grade? 4th. Edward paused. 4th? Shouldn't you be in 6th grade? Her face went red. I miss some school. We moved around a lot. Where'd you live before here? Bend. Before that, Portland. Before that. She trailed off. That's a lot of moving. She stared into her hot chocolate. Mom says it's for work? What kind of work does she do? Different things. She's real smart. Something in the way she said it made Edward's chest tighten, like she was reciting a script. You miss your friends? From all those places. Kaylee's grip tightened on her mug. I don't really make friends. Why not? We never stay long enough. They sat in silence. The kitchen clock ticked loudly. Outside, rain started pattering against the windows. Uncle Edward. Yeah. How long do you think Mom's job will take? She said a month. Maybe 6 weeks. Kaylee nodded, but her expression didn't change. She looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. You worried about something? Edward asked. No, sir. Too fast again. I'm just tired. But she didn't go back to bed. She sat at his kitchen table until dawn, holding a mug of cold hot chocolate, staring out at the rain. Edward woke up on Saturday to the smell of burning toast. He found Kaylee in the kitchen, frantically scraping black crumbs into the sink. I'm sorry, she said without turning around. I wanted to make breakfast, but I burned it. I'll clean it up. Hey, it's okay. He moved to the counter beside her. Happens to everyone. I'm not supposed to use the stove without asking. Well, you can ask. But toast is fine. Let me show you how this toaster works. It's kind of tricky. She watched him adjust the settings like she was memorizing instructions for a test. There. Try again. This time the toast came out golden brown. Edward spread peanut butter on one slice, handed it to her. She took a tiny bite. Good. She nodded, but didn't take another bite. Not hungry. I don't eat much in the morning. Edward watched her push the toast around her plate. In the daylight, she looked even thinner than she had the night before. Her shoulder blades jutted through her t-shirt. When's the last time you saw a doctor? He asked. I don't remember. How about a dentist? She touched her mouth self-consciously. Mom says my teeth are fine. Edward made a mental note to call his dentist on Monday. After breakfast, he showed her around his small house. She moved carefully, as if she was afraid to touch anything. When they passed the bathroom mirror, she looked away. You don't like mirrors? He asked. They're okay. But she kept her eyes down whenever they passed one. That afternoon, Edward took her to the grocery store. He needed supplies and figured she could pick out things she liked to eat. She walked beside him without speaking, hands clasped behind her back. What kind of cereal do you want? Whatever you buy is fine. Come on. Everyone has a favorite cereal. She stared at the dozens of colorful boxes. I don't know. How about this one? He grabbed a box of something with cartoon characters. She nodded, but didn't look enthusiastic to eye in the produce section. He picked up apples, bananas, carrots. Basic stuff. You like vegetables? Yes, sir. Any favorites? Whatever Mom buys. Edward stopped pushing the cart. Kaylee, what do you like? Not what your mom likes. What do you like? She looked panicked. I don't know. An 11-year-old girl who didn't know what food she liked. Edward filed that away with everything else that felt wrong. That night, Kaylee sat at his kitchen table with a plate of spaghetti in front of her. She'd taken 3 bites in 15 minutes. Not good, Edward asked. It's good. I'm just not very hungry. You said that this morning, too. And yesterday. She put her fork down. I'm sorry. I know I should eat more. You don't need to apologize. I'm just worried about you. Her head snapped up. You don't need to worry. I'm fine. But her hands were shaking. Sunday morning, Edward called Marla Dacey. He'd known her since high school. She'd become a children's therapist after college, worked with kids who'd been through trauma. If anyone could give him advice, it was Marla. Edward Keene, she said when she picked up. It's been forever. Hey, Marla, I need a favor. He explained the situation while Kaylee watched cartoons in the living room. Nancy, the sudden guardianship. Kaylee's behavior. She won't eat, he said, afraid of mirrors. Jumps at every noise. Something's not right. How much do you know about her home situation? Nothing good. Her mom's always been trouble. But this feels different. Can I talk to her? Casually, I mean. Not as a therapist. Just as your friend who happens to work with kids. Yeah, that'd be good. Marla came over that afternoon with a bag of art supplies. She was good with kids, had that easy way of making them comfortable. But even she struggled to get Kaylee to open up. I brought some drawing stuff, Marla said, spreading paper and crayons on the kitchen table. You like to draw? I don't know. Want to try? Sometimes it's fun to just put colors on paper. Kaylee picked up a black crayon and drew a small house. No windows, no door, just 4 walls and a triangular roof. Tell me about your house, Marla said gently. It's not my house. We don't have a house. Where do you live? Different places. Marla tried a different approach. What's your favorite thing to do? I don't have favorites. Everyone has something they like to do. Kaylee's hand tightened on the crayon. I like to be quiet. Being quiet is good sometimes. What about when you don't want to be quiet? I'm always supposed to be quiet. Edward and Marla exchanged looks across the table. What happens when you're not quiet? Marla asked. Kaylee stopped drawing. I get in trouble. What kind of trouble? I have to go to my room. Sometimes. She trailed off. Sometimes what? Nothing. I just have to be quiet. After Marla left, Edward found Kaylee in the spare room, sitting on the bed with her knees drawn up. You okay? She nodded, but didn't look at him. Marla's nice, isn't she? I guess. She works with kids who are having a hard time. Kids who need someone to talk to. I don't need to talk to anyone. Edward sat on the edge of the bed. Everyone needs someone to talk to. Not me. Why not? Because. She buried her face in her knees. Because talking makes things worse. That night, Edward called Kaylee's school in Bend. The secretary was helpful once he explained he was her uncle. Kaylee Evans? Oh yes, I remember her. Sweet little girl. Very quiet. How was her attendance? Spotty. Her mother called in sick for her a lot. We were concerned about her academic progress. She was behind grade level when she enrolled, and the absences didn't help. Behind how much? At least a year, maybe more. We recommended testing, but her mother declined. Said they'd be moving soon anyway. Edward gripped the phone tighter. Did you ever have any other concerns? A pause. I probably shouldn't say this, but yes. Her teacher noticed she was often tired, had trouble concentrating. She rarely brought lunch, and when we offered her free meals, she ate like she was starving. Did anyone contact social services? We discussed it, but before we could file a report, the family moved. We lost track of them after that. Edward hung up and stared at his phone. A pattern was emerging, and he didn't like what he was seeing. On Monday morning, he called his dentist and made an appointment for Kaylee. Then he called his doctor. Both could see her that week. Why do I need to see a doctor? Kaylee asked when he told her. Just a checkup. Make sure you're healthy. I'm not sick, I know, but it's good to have a doctor here in town, in case you ever need one. She accepted this without argument, which worried him more than protest would have. That afternoon, Marla called. I've been thinking about your niece, she said. Edward, this kid's seen something, and she's terrified of being sent back. Sent back where? To whatever situation she came from. She's got classic signs of trauma. The hypervigilance, the people-pleasing, the inability to express preferences. She's been taught that survival depends on being invisible. Edward's jaw clenched. What do you think happened to her? I can't say for sure without proper evaluation. But neglect, definitely. Possibly worse. The way she talks about being quiet, about getting in trouble, someone's been controlling her through fear. What do I do? Keep documenting everything. Get her medical and dental exams. Build a record. And Edward? Don't let that woman take her back until you know she's safe. Tuesday night, Edward woke to find Kaylee standing in his bedroom doorway. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Hey," he said softly, sitting up. "What's wrong?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you up." "It's okay. Bad dream." She shook her head, then nodded, then shook her head again. "Come here." He patted the edge of his bed. "Sit down." She perched on the very edge, ready to run. "Want to talk about it?" "I can't." "Why not?" "Because." Her voice broke. "Because I'm not supposed to tell." Edward's chest tightened. "Not supposed to tell what?" "Anything. About home. About Mom. About—" She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I'm not supposed to tell anyone anything." "Who told you that?" "Mom. She said if I tell people things, they'll take me away and put me with strangers who don't love me." "That's not true." "She said social workers are bad people who break up families." Edward felt anger building in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "Kaylee, sometimes kids need help. Sometimes adults make mistakes and kids get hurt. When that happens, there are people whose job it is to keep kids safe." "But Mom said—" "I know what she said, but she's wrong." Kaylee stared at her hands. "I don't know what's true anymore. I'll tell you what's true. You're safe here. You can tell me anything, and I won't let anyone hurt you for it." She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice so small he had to lean forward to hear it, "Actually, Uncle, Mom doesn't really have a job here." "What do you mean?" "She doesn't have a contracting job. She came here because of Tanner." "Who's Tanner?" "Her friend. He's here in Eugene. He has a house." Edward's pulse quickened. "Is that where she's staying?" Kaylee nodded. "He gets mad a lot. He yells and throws things." "Does he hurt you?" "Sometimes he hits, but mostly he yells at Mom. She cries after." Edward reached for his phone. "Kaylee, I need to record what you're telling me. Is that okay?" She looked scared. "Will I get in trouble?" "No, but what you're saying is important. I want to make sure I remember it exactly." She nodded. Edward opened his voice recorder app. "It's Tuesday night, October 15th. Kaylee is telling me about her living situation." For the next 20 minutes, Kaylee talked. Her words came out in fits and starts, like water through a broken dam. Edward had to fight to keep his expression neutral as the story unfolded. Tanner Rusk, Nancy's boyfriend, who drank too much and had a temper. He'd hit Kaylee twice, once for being too loud, once for eating the last of something. Nancy had watched both times and done nothing. The apartment in Bend where they'd lived before. Nancy would disappear for days, leaving Kaylee alone with a few boxes of crackers and instructions to tell anyone who asked that Mom was sick in bed. The time Nancy had threatened to get rid of her, she ever told teachers or doctors about what happened at home. "She said nobody would believe me anyway," Kaylee whispered. "She said people think kids lie. Some adults think that," Edward said carefully. "But not all of them. And not me." When she was done talking, Kaylee looked exhausted. "Are you going to call the police?" "I'm going to call some people who can help." "Will they take me away?" Edward met her eyes. "I don't know, but I promise you this. I won't let anyone hurt you. Whatever happens, you're going to be safe." The next morning, Edward called Child Protective Services. He also called Marla and asked her to write up her observations. By noon, he had an appointment with a CPS caseworker for Friday. Thursday afternoon, Nancy called. "How's my baby girl doing?" she asked in that sweet voice that made Edward's skin crawl. "She's fine. Can I talk to her?" Edward found Kaylee in the living room, reading a book he'd bought her. She looked up when he held out the phone. "It's your mom." Her face went pale. She took the phone with trembling hands. "Hi, Mom." Long pause. "Yes, I'm being good." Another pause. "No, I haven't told anyone anything." She glanced at Edward. "Yes, Mom. I know. Okay. Bye." She handed the phone back quickly. "Nancy," Edward said into the phone. "She sounds good. You're taking good care of her. When are you coming back?" "Actually, the job got extended. Might be a couple more weeks." "Is that okay?" "No." Silence. "Excuse me." I said no. You said 1 month. It's been 2 weeks. "Edward, I need this job. The money is really good. Find childcare." "I can't afford childcare." "And she's happy with you, isn't she?" "She said she's being good." Edward watched Kaylee, who was pretending to read, but listening to every word. "We need to talk," he said. "In person. I'm really busy right now. Friday." Come here Friday afternoon. Edward, I don't think you understand. He hung up. Friday morning, the CPS caseworker arrived. Janet Mills was a tired-looking woman in her 50s who'd clearly seen everything. Edward showed her Marla's written observations, played her the recording of Kaylee's testimony, gave her copies of the school records from Bend. This is good documentation, Janet said. Very thorough. We'll open an investigation immediately. What happens next? We'll interview the child formally. We'll try to locate and interview the mother. If we find evidence of abuse or neglect, we'll take appropriate action. Which could be what? Depends on what we find. Could be mandatory parenting classes, supervised visitation, temporary removal from the home. In severe cases, termination of parental rights. At 3 o'clock, Nancy arrived. Edward had been dreading this moment, but he was ready for it. She swept into his living room like she owned it, all fake smiles and careful charm. Edward, you look good. Where's my girl? She's at a friend's house. Nancy's smile faltered. Why? Because we need to talk. Adult to adult. I don't like your tone. Edward stayed standing while she sat on his couch. I don't like your parenting. Her mask slipped completely. Excuse me? Kaylee's been telling me things. About Tanner. About being left alone for days. About you threatening to get rid of her. Nancy stood up fast. That little liar. I knew this would happen. You turn her against me. She's not lying. She's 11 years old. Kids make things up. Do they make up being underweight? Missing teeth? Being 2 grades behind? She's always been small. And we moved around for work. That's not my fault. Edward pulled out his phone. I recorded her telling me about Tanner hitting her. About you watching it happen. Nancy's face went white, then red. You can't do that. That's illegal. No, it's not. You're trying to steal my daughter. I'm trying to protect her. Nancy moved toward the door. This conversation is over. I want Kaylee. Now. No. She's my daughter. And she's my niece. Tom's daughter. And I'm not letting you destroy her the way you destroyed him. Nancy spun around. How dare you? Tom gave you everything. His money, his trust, his love. And you bled him dry. Well, you're not doing it to Kaylee. You're nothing. Nancy spat. You're nobody contractor who lives alone because nobody can stand you. This won't stick. I'll get my daughter back, and you'll never see her again. We'll see. She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. Edward called Janet Mills immediately. She just left, he said, and she made it clear she's planning to take Kaylee. We'll expedite the investigation. Can you keep the child safe until we sort this out? Yes. Good. Don't let the mother take her under any circumstances. If she tries, call the police. That evening, Edward sat Kaylee down at the kitchen table. Your mom came by today, he said. Her face went pale. Is she taking me back? Not today. But she will, won't she? Edward looked at this thin, scared child who'd been taught that love meant silence and survival meant invisibility. Kaylee, I need you to understand something. What happened to you at home, that's not normal. Kids shouldn't be hit. They shouldn't be left alone for days. They shouldn't be threatened or scared all the time. But she's my mom. I know, and that makes it harder. But being someone's mom doesn't give them the right to hurt you. Tears started down her cheeks. What's going to happen to me? Edward reached across the table and took her small hand in his. It felt fragile as bird bones. I don't know yet, but I promise you this. I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. Not your mom, not Tanner, not anyone. Whatever it takes. She squeezed his hand. You promise? I promise. But as he looked at her tear-stained face, Edward realized that CPS cases could take months. Court battles could drag on for years. Nancy had gotten away with abuse and neglect for Kaylee's entire life. The system had failed this child once already. It might fail her again. Edward made a decision that night, sitting in his kitchen after Kaylee had gone to bed. He wasn't going to wait for the system to maybe protect his niece. He wasn't going to fight Nancy in family court, where she could lie and manipulate and charm her way out of consequences. He was going to destroy her first. Edward spent Saturday morning making phone calls. The first was to Nico Demps, a guy he'd known since high school who'd gone into IT after college. Last Edward heard, Nico was managing systems for a tech company in Portland. He'd also developed what he liked to call ethical hacking skills, finding security vulnerabilities and reporting them to companies before malicious hackers could exploit them. Edward Keene, Nico said when he picked up, "Man, it's been what, 5 years?" Something like that. "I need a favor, Nico." "A big one." Edward explained the situation. Nancy, Kaylee, the abuse, the pattern of moving whenever authorities got too close. "I need to know everything about her," Edward said. "Where she's lived, what names she's used, what government benefits she's claimed. Everything. That's walking a pretty thin legal line, man. She's been abusing an 11-year-old girl for years. The system keeps failing her because Nancy disappears before anyone can build a case." Nico was quiet for a moment. "Send me what you know. Names, dates, addresses, social security number if you have it. I'll see what I can find through public records." "Thanks, Nico. But Edward, if I find evidence of crimes, I'm not keeping it quiet. That stuff goes to the authorities." "That's exactly what I want." Next, Edward called his dentist's office. Kaylee's appointment had been Monday, and the results were disturbing. 3 cavities that needed immediate attention, plus signs of long-term dental neglect. Dr. Peterson said she hasn't seen a dentist in years, the receptionist told him. Maybe never. The decay patterns suggest chronic lack of care. Edward asked for copies of all records and x-rays. Then he called his family doctor. Kaylee's physical exam had revealed she was significantly underweight for her age and height. Blood tests showed deficiencies in iron and vitamin D consistent with malnutrition. "Dr. Romano wants to see her again in 2 weeks, the nurse said. "He's concerned about her growth patterns." More documentation for the file Edward was building. Sunday afternoon, Nico called back. "Dude, your sister-in-law has been busy. I found records of her living in at least 6 different addresses across 3 states in the past 4 years. 6 addresses: Portland, Bend, Salem, Corvallis, and 2 different places in Medford. And here's the interesting part, she filed for government assistance at all of them." Edward felt his pulse quicken. What kind of assistance? SNAP benefits, child tax credit, WIC, housing assistance. But here's where it gets weird. Some of these overlap. She was claiming residency in Portland while also receiving benefits in Bend. That's fraud. Yeah, it is. And there's more. She's been claiming Kaylee as special needs to get additional benefits. Special needs, learning disability, attention deficit disorder, developmental delays. I found 3 different applications where she claimed different diagnoses, but I can't find any medical records supporting any of them. Edward gripped the phone tighter. She's been using her own daughter to commit welfare fraud. Looks like it. And Edward, the amounts aren't small. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars over the past few years. Can you prove it? I can document the public records. The applications, the addresses, the overlapping claims. Whether that's enough for prosecution depends on how good the investigators are. What about this Tanner guy? Can you find anything on him? Tanner Rusk? Yeah, I found him. He's got a record. Assault, domestic violence, DUI. He's been arrested 4 times in the past 3 years. Edward closed his eyes. Nancy had moved in with a man with a history of violence and brought her 11-year-old daughter along. Nico, I need you to put all of this together. Everything you found. Make it look professional, like a real investigation report. What are you planning to do with it? I'm going to make sure the right people see it. Monday morning, Edward got a call from Janet Mills at CPS. "Mr. Keene, we've run into a problem. We can't locate Nancy Evans." "What do you mean?" "The address she gave when she dropped off her daughter doesn't exist. We've checked with local hotels, rental agencies. Nothing. It's like she disappeared." Edward wasn't surprised. "She's probably staying with her boyfriend. Do you have his information?" "Tanner Rusk. I don't have an address, but I can get one." He called Nico back. Within an hour, Nico had found 2 possible addresses for Tanner: an apartment complex on the south side of Eugene and a house he'd rented 6 months ago. Edward drove by both locations. The apartment complex was a run-down place with broken playground equipment and cars on blocks in the parking lot. The house was in a slightly better neighborhood, but looked neglected, overgrown yard, peeling paint, newspapers piled on the porch. He could see the house. Edward saw Nancy's Honda parked in the driveway. He called CPS and gave them the address. That evening, Janet Mills called him back. "We went to the house," she said. Nancy wasn't there, but we spoke with Tanner Rusk. He confirmed she's been staying there, but he said she left town yesterday for a job interview. Did you believe him? Honestly? No, but we can't force our way into his house without a warrant, and we don't have enough evidence for that yet. What about what Kaylee told me? What about the recording? It's helpful, but we need more. Child testimony alone isn't always enough, especially when the child is this young and traumatized. We need corroborating evidence. Edward hung up frustrated. Nancy was playing games, hiding, using the system's limitations against itself. Meanwhile, Kaylee was asking every day when her mom was coming back, torn between fear and the complicated love children feel for even abusive parents. "I miss her," Kaylee had told him the night before. "I know that's weird." "It's not weird," Edward had said. "She's your mom. It's okay to miss her and be scared of her at the same time." But missing her or not, Kaylee was getting healthier every day she stayed with Edward. She gained 3 pounds in 3 weeks. She was sleeping better, talking more, even laughing occasionally when they practiced throwing a baseball in the backyard. Edward wasn't going to let Nancy undo that progress. By Wednesday, Nico had put together a comprehensive file on Nancy's activities. Edward sat in his kitchen, spreading documents across the table, amazed at the scope of her deception. "She's been running this scam for at least 5 years, Nico said over the phone. "Maybe longer. Look at page 12, that's where I found the pattern." Edward found the page. It was a timeline showing Nancy's moves, benefit applications, and address changes. She would move to a new city, apply for emergency assistance, claiming to be homeless or fleeing domestic violence, get temporary housing and food stamps, then move again before caseworkers could follow up. "She's claiming different disabilities for Kaylee at each location," Nico continued. In Portland, she said the kid had ADHD. In Salem, it was a learning disability. In Bend, she claimed developmental delays, but no medical records supporting any of it, right? And here's the smoking gun. I found emails. Emails. She used the same Gmail account for all her benefit applications. Google's pretty good about archiving everything. Some of these emails are to Tanner, talking about the scam. Edward's pulse quickened. What do they say? Quote, "The special needs thing is working great. Got an extra $300 this month just for checking the right boxes on the forms." That's from 8 months ago. She's admitting to fraud in writing. Gets better. There's another one where she tells him about finding doctors who don't ask too many questions. Quote, "Dr. Williams signed off on the ADHD thing without even testing her. These people don't care as long as their paperwork looks right." Edward felt sick. Nancy had been shopping for corrupt doctors to rubber stamp fake diagnoses for her own daughter. "Nico, can you make this look official? Like a real investigation report? I can make it look professional. Charts, timelines, documentation." "But Edward, this needs to go to law enforcement. We're talking about federal crimes here." "I know, but I want to make sure it lands in the right hands." Edward had been thinking about this part of the plan for days. CPS was overworked and underfunded. Local police might not understand the scope of the fraud. He needed someone who would take this seriously, someone who had the resources to build a real case. He also needed public pressure. Thursday morning, Edward called the Oregon DHS Fraud Division. He spoke with an investigator named Rebecca Torres, who specialized in benefit fraud cases. "How much are we talking about?" Torres asked after Edward gave her an overview. "Conservative estimate? $60,000 over 4 years. But it could be more if she's been doing this longer." "That's a felony. Multiple felonies, actually. Can you send me what you have? I could do better than that. I can bring it to you in person." Friday afternoon, Edward sat in Rebecca Torres's office in Salem, watching her page through Nico's report. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who'd clearly seen her share of benefit fraud cases. "This is impressive work," she said. "Very thorough. Who compiled this?" "A friend who works in IT. Everything's from public records. The email evidence is particularly damning. Do you know if she's still actively committing fraud? She's been in Eugene for 3 weeks. I'd be surprised if she hasn't applied for emergency assistance." Torres made a note. "We'll check. Mr. Keene, I want you to know that cases like this can take months to prosecute. The wheels of justice turn slowly." "I understand. But this is solid evidence. If even half of this holds up, she's looking at serious prison time. That was what Edward wanted to hear. His next stop was the offices of the Eugene Weekly, a local newspaper that covered politics and social issues. Edward had done some research and found that a reporter named Jude Morano had written several pieces about government fraud and child welfare failures. Morano was younger than Edward had expected, maybe 30, with the eager intensity of someone who still believed journalism could change the world. He said this involves welfare, fraud, and child abuse. Morano asked after Edward gave him the basics. Both. The fraud was the means, but child abuse was the result. She's been dragging her daughter from place to place, using her as a prop to get government money, never staying anywhere long enough for schools or doctors to intervene. Edward showed him selected portions of Nico's report, the timeline, the overlapping benefit claims, the fake medical diagnoses. This is substantial, Morano said, but I need to verify everything independently. Talk to sources, confirm the records. I understand, and I want to interview the child, if possible. Edward shook his head. She's been through enough, but I can give you documentation of her condition when she came to me. Medical records, school records, statements from professionals who've evaluated her. That could work. Morano leaned back in his chair. Mr. Keene, can I ask why you're bringing this to me instead of just letting law enforcement handle it? Edward had thought about this question. Because I've seen how the system works. Cases get buried in bureaucracy. Prosecutors plea bargain down to nothing. Kids fall through the cracks while their abusers get second chances. And you think media pressure will help? I think sunlight is the best disinfectant. Morano smiled. I like that. Give me a week to verify what you've shown me. If it checks out, I'll run the story. The following Tuesday, Edward got a call from Detective Elena Trigg with the Eugene Police Department. She specialized in crimes against children and had been assigned to investigate Kaylee's case. Mr. Keene, I understand you filed a report about child abuse and neglect. That's right. I'd like to meet with you and the child. Would today work? This afternoon would be good. Detective Trigg arrived at 3 o'clock. She was a serious woman in her late 30s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much. But her manner with Kaylee was gentle and patient. Hi, Kaylee. I'm Detective Trigg. I work with kids who have been hurt or scared. Your Uncle Edward called me because he's worried about you. Kaylee looked at Edward, who nodded encouragingly. I want to ask you some questions about your mom and where you lived before you came here. Is that okay? For the next hour, Detective Trigg carefully walked Kaylee through her story. She used techniques Edward recognized from TV shows, open-ended questions, no leading or suggestive language. Frequent breaks when Kaylee seemed overwhelmed. The story that emerged was even worse than what Kaylee had initially told Edward. More details about Tanner's violence. More incidents of being left alone. Stories about Nancy coaching her on what to tell doctors and teachers. Kaylee, did your mom ever tell you to say you had trouble learning or paying attention? Yes. She said I had ADD. She taught me what to say to the doctors. What did she teach you to say? That I couldn't sit still in school, that I couldn't remember things, that I got confused easily. But was that true? Kaylee looked confused. I don't know. Mom said it was true. Detective Trigg made careful notes throughout the interview. When they were done, she asked Edward to walk her to her car. That child has been systematically coached to lie to authority figures, she said. It's going to take months of therapy to undo that conditioning. What happens next? I'm going to put together a case file and present it to the prosecutor. Child abuse, child neglect, possibly child endangerment. The welfare fraud is outside my jurisdiction, but I'll coordinate with DHS. What are the chances Nancy sees prison time? Honestly, without corroborating evidence beyond the child's testimony, it's hard to say. Defense attorneys are very good at attacking the credibility of child witnesses, especially ones who've been coached to lie. Edward pulled out a thick folder. What if I told you I had corroborating evidence? He handed her copies of everything Nico had compiled. The fraudulent benefit applications, the fake medical diagnoses, the emails admitting to the scam, the timeline showing Nancy's pattern of moving whenever authorities got close. Detective Trigg flipped through the documents, her eyebrows rising higher with each page. Where did you get this? A friend who works in IT. Everything's from public records. This is extensive. It's also just the beginning. She's been doing this for years, probably in multiple states. Kaylee might not be her only victim. Mr. Keene, this changes everything. This isn't just child abuse anymore. This is organized, systematic fraud with child abuse as a component. We're talking about federal charges. How long will it take to build a case? With this level of documentation? Not long. I'll coordinate with the FBI's white-collar crime unit and with DHS investigators. We should have enough for arrest warrants within a week. That evening, Jude Morano called. I verified most of what you showed me, he said. The benefit applications, the addresses, the medical records. It's all true. You're going to run the story? I'm going to run the story. But I want to give you a heads up, this is going to be big. Child welfare fraud, systematic abuse, government agencies failing to protect a vulnerable child. It's going to get attention. Good. The story runs in tomorrow's paper and goes online at midnight tonight. You might want to prepare your niece for the media attention. Edward thanked him and hung up. He found Kaylee in the living room, working on homework. She was getting caught up academically. Edward had hired a tutor to help her with the basics she'd missed. Kaylee, I need to talk to you about something. She looked up from her math worksheet. Am I in trouble? No, but tomorrow there's going to be a story in a newspaper about you and your mom. Her face went pale. What kind of story? About the things that happened to you. About your mom taking money she wasn't supposed to take. About how you weren't safe living with her. Will people know it's about me? The story won't use your name, but some people might figure it out. Tears started down her cheeks. Will Mom see it? Probably. She's going to be so mad. Edward sat beside her on the couch. Kaylee, your mom is going to be mad at me, not at you. None of this is your fault, but I told you things I wasn't supposed to tell. You did the right thing. You were brave, and you told the truth. That's what good people do. What's going to happen to her? Edward chose his words carefully. She's probably going to get in trouble. The kind of trouble where adults have to go to court and maybe go to jail. For how long? I don't know. That's up to the judge. Kaylee wiped her eyes. Will I ever see her again? Edward's chest tightened. Despite everything Nancy had done, she was still this child's mother. Kaylee's feelings about her were complicated and painful. I don't know that either. But I promise you this, you're never going back to that situation. You're never going to be hurt like that again. How do you know? Because I won't let it happen. At midnight, Jude Morano's story went live on the Eugene Weekly website. Edward read it on his phone, impressed by the reporter's thorough work. The headline read, "The system that failed Kaylee, how one mother exploited welfare programs while abusing her daughter." The story laid out Nancy's pattern of fraud in devastating detail. The fake addresses, the overlapping benefit claims, the coached medical diagnoses. It quoted anonymous sources from schools and social services who admitted they'd suspected abuse, but never had enough evidence to act. But the most powerful part was the clinical description of Kaylee's condition when she arrived at Edward's house. Underweight, afraid, educationally neglected, showing clear signs of long-term trauma. The story ended with a broader indictment of a system that allowed predators like Nancy to slip through the cracks while their victims suffered in silence. WY morning, the story had been picked up by the Portland papers and several news websites. Edward's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Reporters wanting interviews, CPS officials wanting updates, concerned citizens wanting to know how they could help. At 8 a.m., Detective Trigg called. "Have you seen the news coverage?" "Yeah. My phone's been ringing all morning. The prosecutor wants to expedite the case. The FBI wants to coordinate a joint investigation. DHS is launching a comprehensive review of Nancy's benefit history going back 10 years. That's good, right? That's very good. Public pressure works, Mr. Keene. When people are paying attention, the system moves faster. At 9 a.m., Rebecca Torres from the DHS Fraud Division called. "Mr. Keene, I wanted to let you know we found Nancy Evans." Edward's pulse quickened. "Where?" "She applied for emergency assistance in Eugene 3 days ago. Used Tanner Rusk's address. Claimed she was fleeing domestic violence with her disabled daughter. Even though her daughter isn't with her. That's fraud on top of fraud. We're coordinating with police to execute a warrant this afternoon." At 10 a.m., Edward's phone rang with a number he recognized. Nancy. Edward. Her voice was tight with rage. What did you do? I protected my niece. You destroyed my life. You destroyed your own life. I just documented it. That newspaper story is full of lies. Which part is the lie, Nancy? The part where you claim Kaylee was disabled to get extra money? The part where you left her alone for days at a time? The part where you let your boyfriend hit her? Silence. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. I have your emails, Nancy. The ones where you bragged to Tanner about gaming the system. I have medical records showing Kaylee's malnutrition. I have school records showing her absences. I have recordings of her telling me exactly what you did to her. You turned my own daughter against me. She was never against you. She was scared of you. There's a difference. I'm her mother. No, Edward said. You're a predator who happened to give birth to her. There's a difference. Nancy's voice dropped to a whisper. You have no idea what you've done. When I get out of this, when I prove you're lying, I'm going to make you pay. Nancy, what? You're not getting out of this. He hung up. 2 hours later, Detective Trigg called. We arrested Nancy Evans at 12:30 this afternoon. Multiple charges: child abuse, child neglect, welfare fraud, document forgery. She's being held without bail pending arraignment. Edward closed his eyes and felt something release in his chest. For the first time in weeks, he could breathe fully. What happens now? Now we build a case. With the evidence you provided and the media attention, the prosecutor is confident we can get a conviction on all charges. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe less if she takes a plea deal, which she probably will. Edward found Kaylee in the backyard, throwing a tennis ball for the neighbor's dog who liked to visit through a gap in the fence. Hey, he said, sitting on the back steps. She sat beside him. Is Mom in jail? Yeah. For how long? We'll find out. Kaylee was quiet for a moment. Are you sad? No. Are you? I don't know. I think I'm mostly scared. Of what? That she'll get out and come back. Edward put his arm around her thin shoulders. She's not coming back, Kaylee. Not to hurt you. I promise. They sat together in the afternoon sun, watching the neighbor's dog chase the tennis ball across the yard. For the first time since Nancy had dropped Kaylee off, Edward felt like they might actually be safe. The arraignment was scheduled for Thursday morning. Edward had planned to attend, but Detective Trigg called him Wednesday night with an unexpected development. Nancy posted bail. She said Edward's blood went cold. Ow! Her boyfriend, Tanner Rusk. He put up his house as collateral. I thought she was being held without bail. The judge set it high, $50,000, but not impossibly high. Her lawyer argued she wasn't a flight risk since her daughter was in Eugene. Edward gripped the phone. She's going to run. Maybe. We've got her passport flagged, and she has to check in with a pretrial officer daily. But Edward, you need to be careful. She blamed you specifically for everything that's happened. What do you mean? During the arraignment, she told the judge you manipulated her daughter into lying. She claims you're trying to steal Kaylee out of revenge against her. Her lawyer filed a motion for emergency custody. Edward felt rage building in his chest. Even facing prison, Nancy was still playing games, still trying to manipulate the system. Can she get custody? Not likely, given the charges. But it shows she's not done fighting. Watch your back. Edward hung up and walked to Kaylee's room. She was asleep, finally looking peaceful after weeks of nightmares. He wasn't going to let Nancy shatter that peace. Thursday evening, as Edward was making dinner, someone knocked on his front door. He looked through the peephole and saw Nancy standing on his front porch. She looked different, thinner, older, with dark circles under her eyes. Edward opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Nancy, Edward. Her voice was calm, controlled. I think we need to talk. We don't have anything to talk about. We have Kaylee to talk about. Kaylee's not your concern anymore. Nancy's mask slipped slightly. She's my daughter. She's a child you abused and neglected and used to commit fraud. The courts will decide what happens to her. The courts will see through your lies. Edward leaned against the doorframe. Which lies are those, Nancy? The medical records showing she was malnourished? The school records showing she was educationally neglected? The recordings of her describing how Tanner hit her while you watched? She's 11 years old. She doesn't understand what she's saying. She understands that you hurt her. Nancy stepped closer. You turned her against me. I gave her a safe place to tell the truth. You manipulated her. I fed her. I got her medical care. I enrolled her in school. Things you never did. Nancy's composure cracked completely. You self-righteous bastard. You think you're so much better than me. I think I'm someone who doesn't abuse children. I never abused her. You left her alone for days at a time. I was working. You let your boyfriend hit her. Tanner never. I have recordings, Nancy. Her words, describing exactly what he did to her while you watched. She's lying. Medical records don't lie. Bruises don't lie. Your own emails don't lie. Nancy's face twisted with rage. You're nothing. You're nobody. A failed contractor who lives alone because nobody can stand you. Edward straightened. And you're going to prison. This won't stick. It never sticks. I'll get a good lawyer. I'll prove Kaylee was coached. You'll what? Disappear again? Move to another state and start over? It's too late for that, Nancy. Too many people are watching now. You don't know what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A woman who spent years systematically abusing her daughter and defrauding the government. A woman who moved from place to place whenever authorities got close. A woman who coached an 11-year-old to lie to doctors so she could collect disability benefits. Nancy was shaking with rage. When I prove you're lying. When you prove I'm lying about what? About the fact that Kaylee weighed 63 pounds when she came here? About the fact that she hadn't seen a dentist in 3 years? About the fact that she was 2 grades behind because you moved her around to avoid truancy investigations? When I get out of this, you're not getting out of this. Edward's voice was cold, final. You're going to prison, Nancy, for a long time, and Kaylee is never going back to you. Nancy stepped back, her face pale. You can't do this to me. I didn't do this to you. You did this to yourself. From inside the house, Edward heard footsteps. Kaylee appeared in the hallway, drawn by the voices. Mom? She whispered. Nancy's expression changed instantly, becoming soft and pleading. Baby girl, come here, sweetheart. Mommy's here. Kaylee took a step forward, then stopped. She looked between Nancy and Edward, confusion and fear warring on her face. Come on, honey, Nancy continued. Let's go home. She is home, Edward said firmly. Nancy ignored him. Kaylee, Uncle Edward has been telling people lies about Mommy. But it's okay. We're going to fix this. Kaylee shook her head slowly. I don't want to go back to Tanner's house. Nancy's mask slipped again. We're not going back there. We're going somewhere new. Just you and me. I don't want to move again. Sometimes we have to move, baby. You know that. Kaylee's voice was small but clear. I told Uncle Edward about what Tanner did. About being left alone. About you saying I was sick when I wasn't. Nancy's face went white. Honey, you misunderstood. I didn't misunderstand. I remember. You're confused. Uncle Edward confused you. Kaylee stepped back toward Edward. No, I remember everything. Nancy looked at her daughter, really looked at her for the first time. Kaylee had gained weight. Her color was better. She stood straighter. She looked healthy. Happy. You turned her against me, Nancy whispered. I kept her safe, Edward replied. That Nancy's rage returned full force. You're going to regret this. When I prove you're lying, when I get her back, you're never going to see her again. Nancy, what? You always said that. This time it's airtight. She stared at him, her face cycling through emotions, rage, fear, desperation. You have no idea what you've done, she said finally. I know exactly what I've done. Nancy turned to leave, then spun back. This isn't over. Yeah, it is. She walked to her car with shaking hands. Edward watched her drive away, then turned to find Kaylee behind him. Are you okay? He asked. She nodded, but her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She looked different. How? Smaller. Sadder. Edward knelt to her level. How do you feel? Scared. But also, she struggled for the word. Free. Edward pulled her into a hug. You are free. You don't have to be afraid anymore. But even as he said it, he knew Nancy wasn't done. Desperate people did desperate things, and Nancy Evans was running out of options. 20 minutes later, police sirens echoed through the neighborhood. Edward looked out his front window to see 3 patrol cars pulling up to his house. Detective Trigg got out of the lead car and walked to his door. Mr. Keene, we just arrested Nancy Evans. For what? Violation of her bail conditions. She was supposed to stay away from you and Kaylee. Her probation officer was monitoring her phone. She called her lawyer from your driveway. Said she was going to handle this herself. Edward felt relief flood through him. So she's back in jail. She's back in jail. And this time, no bail. The judge is not going to be happy about her violating the conditions of her release. The trial was scheduled for February, but Nancy's lawyer contacted the prosecutor in December with a plea offer. She would plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. Edward sat in the prosecutor's office with Kaylee and Detective Trigg as District Attorney Patricia Hendricks explained the offer. She's willing to plead guilty to child abuse, child neglect, welfare fraud, and document forgery. In exchange, we drop the child endangerment charges and agree to concurrent rather than consecutive sentencing. What does that mean in real time? Edward asked. 12 to 14 years, eligible for parole in 8. Edward looked at Kaylee, who was sitting quietly beside him. At 12 years old, she'd grown 3 inches and gained 15 pounds since coming to live with him. She was getting straight A's in school and had made 2 close friends. The nightmares had mostly stopped. What do you think? He asked her. I don't want to have to testify in court, she said quietly. If we take the plea deal, you won't have to. Then I think we should take it. Edward turned back to the prosecutor. We accept. The sentencing hearing was held on a cold Monday morning in March. Edward and Kaylee sat in the front row of the courtroom gallery as Nancy, wearing an orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, stood before Judge Richardson. Ms. Evans, the judge, said, "You have pleaded guilty to systematic child abuse and welfare fraud spanning multiple years in multiple states. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything to say?" Nancy's lawyer had clearly coached her. She expressed remorse, claimed she'd been struggling with personal problems, said she loved her daughter and never meant to hurt her. But Edward could see through the performance. Nancy was saying what she thought the judge wanted to hear, nothing more. Judge Richardson wasn't buying it either. Ms. Evans, in 30 years on the bench, I have rarely seen such a calculated pattern of child exploitation. You used your own daughter as a tool to defraud government assistance programs. You exposed her to domestic violence. You neglected her medical and educational needs. You coached her to lie to medical professionals. Nancy kept her head down. More troubling still, you show no genuine understanding of the harm you've caused. Your statements today sound rehearsed and self-serving. The judge paused, reviewing his notes. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 12 to 14 years. I find that recommendation insufficient given the scope and duration of your crimes. Edward felt his pulse quicken. Nancy Evans, I sentence you to 18 years in the Oregon State Penitentiary with eligibility for parole in 12 years. You are also ordered to pay full restitution to the state for fraudulent benefits received, estimated at $78,000. Nancy's knees buckled. Her lawyer steadied her. Furthermore, the judge continued, I am terminating your parental rights to Kaylee Evans effective immediately. Mr. Edward Keene, as the child's current guardian, you are hereby granted permanent legal guardianship with the right to pursue adoption if you so choose. Edward felt Kaylee squeeze his hand. Court is adjourned. As Nancy was led away, she turned to look back at Kaylee. Her expression was unreadable, part anger, part regret, part something that might have been love. Kaylee didn't look away, but she didn't let go of Edward's hand either. Outside the courthouse, Detective Trigg shook Edward's hand. Justice served, she said. Finally, there's more good news. Remember Chessa Harlan, the woman who helped Nancy forge documents? Edward nodded. She took a plea deal too. 3 years, plus cooperation in identifying other fraud schemes. And Tanner Rusk was arrested in Idaho last week on assault charges. The victim was his new girlfriend. Edward wasn't surprised. Men like Tanner didn't change. That evening, Edward sat with Kaylee at their kitchen table, helping her with homework. It was a routine they developed every night after dinner. They'd work through her assignments together. Edward, she said, looking up from her math worksheet. Yeah, are you going to adopt me? He'd been expecting this question. Do you want me to? I think so. But what if you change your mind? What if you get tired of taking care of me? Edward set down his pencil and looked at her. Kaylee, I'm not going anywhere. Whether I officially adopt you or not, you're my family now. Nothing's going to change that. Promise? Promise. She smiled and went back to her math. Edward watched her work, amazed at how far she'd come. The scared, silent child who'd arrived on his doorstep had become a confident, curious kid who asked questions and laughed at his terrible jokes and wasn't afraid to disagree with him when she thought he was wrong. Nancy had tried to break her spirit, but she'd failed. Kaylee was stronger than her mother had ever given her credit. 4.6 months later, Edward stood before a panel of state legislators in Salem, testifying about gaps in the child welfare system. He'd been invited to speak after Jude Morano's follow-up articles about Nancy's case had sparked calls for reform. The problem isn't that we don't have laws to protect children, Edward told the panel. The problem is that we don't have systems to enforce those laws across jurisdictions. He explained how Nancy had exploited the lack of communication between state agencies, moving from place to place whenever investigators got close. She was able to operate for years because no one was looking at the big picture. Each jurisdiction saw isolated incidents, not a pattern of systematic abuse. The committee chair, Senator Williams, leaned forward. What would you recommend? A statewide database for child welfare cases. When someone applies for benefits claiming their child has a disability, that claim should be automatically cross-referenced with medical records. When a child changes schools frequently, that should trigger an automatic review. You're talking about significant resources. I'm talking about saving children's lives. In the audience, Edward could see Kaylee sitting with Marla Dacey, who'd become not just her therapist but a close family friend. At 13, Kaylee was thriving honor roll student, star player on her middle school soccer team, confident enough to speak up when something bothered her. After the hearing, Senator Williams approached Edward privately. Your niece, would she be willing to testify? Not about the details of her abuse, but about the importance of child protection systems? Edward looked at Kaylee, who was talking animatedly with Marla about something she'd learned in science class. You'd have to ask her, he said, but I think she might say yes. 2 weeks later, Kaylee stood before the same legislative panel. She was nervous but determined, reading from notes she'd written herself. My name is Kaylee Keene, she began. 3 years ago, I was a very different person than I am today. She talked about feeling afraid all the time, about not knowing that children weren't supposed to be hungry or scared or hurt. She talked about being taught to lie to adults because no one would believe a kid anyway. I was wrong about that, she said. Adults did believe me, but only when I was brave enough to tell the truth. She looked directly at the committee members. There are other kids like I was. Kids who are scared and hungry and being hurt. They need adults to be brave too. They need you to make sure there are systems in place to protect them. The room was silent when she finished. Senator Williams had tears in her eyes. Thank you, Kaylee. That was very brave. 3 months later, the Oregon legislature passed the Child Protection Enhancement Act, requiring cross-jurisdictional sharing of child welfare information and mandatory reporting protocol for benefit fraud involving children. Governor Martinez signed it in a ceremony at the state capitol. Edward and Kaylee were invited to attend. This law will be known as Kaylee's Law, the governor announced, in honor of a young woman who had the courage to speak her truth and inspire change. Kaylee squeezed Edward's hand and whispered, Do you think Mom will hear about this? Probably. Good. Maybe it will help her understand. Edward looked down at his niece's daughter in everything but genetics. At 14, she was becoming the kind of person Tom would have been proud of. Strong, compassionate, unafraid to fight for what was right. Understand what? That what she did was wrong. That kids deserve better. Edward had never understood how Kaylee could maintain empathy for Nancy after everything she'd endured. But maybe that was the difference between them. Kaylee still had hope that people could change, could become better. Edward didn't share that hope. He'd seen too much, lost too much. Nancy had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. But he admired Kaylee's capacity for forgiveness, even if he couldn't share it. Yeah, he said, maybe it will. That evening, they drove home to Eugene in comfortable silence. The radio played softly, and Kaylee dozed against the passenger window. Edward thought about the journey that had brought them here. Nancy's phone call 3 years ago. Kaylee's arrival, thin and scared and silent. The investigation, the trial, the media attention. He'd set out to destroy Nancy Evans, and he'd succeeded. She was in prison, stripped of her parental rights, facing years behind bars. The system she'd manipulated had finally caught up with her. But somewhere along the way, Edward had discovered something more important than revenge. He'd found family. Kaylee stirred in her seat. "Are we home yet?" "Almost." She settled back against the window. "Good. I have a history test tomorrow." Edward smiled. A history test. Such a normal, everyday concern for a kid to have. 3 years ago, Kaylee's biggest worry was whether her mother would come home or leave her alone for another night. Now she worried about history tests and soccer practice and whether her friends would like the movie she wanted to see on Friday night. Normal kid problems. The kind of problems every child deserved to have. Edward had never forgiven Nancy for what she'd done to Kaylee. He never would. But he'd learned that justice and healing weren't the same thing. Justice was Nancy in prison. Healing was Kaylee falling asleep in the passenger seat, safe and loved and worried about a history test as they pulled into their driveway. Edward looked at the house he'd bought for himself 5 years ago, a simple place for a simple life. Now it was home to two people who'd found each other when they both needed family most. Nancy had thought she could manipulate everyone, control every situation, always stay one step ahead of consequences. That she'd been wrong about that. But she'd also been wrong about something else. She'd told Kaylee that no one would believe her, that adults didn't care about kids, that the system would always fail her. She'd been wrong about that too. Sometimes, Edward reflected as he helped Kaylee carry her backpack inside. Justice took time. Sometimes the system did fail. But sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys won. And sometimes that was enough.